Welcome back to another episode of the Ohio Bass Podcast. I'm your host, Nick. You can follow me on X or TikTok at Ohio_Bass, on Instagram or Threads at Ohio_Bass_outdoors. You can always email the show at theohiobasspodcast@gmail.com or join our large listening community on Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, Amazon Music, Audacity, TuneIn, Google Podcast, YouTube, and more. As always, I have a great interview lined up later. We take a trip up to Canada and talk to the first two-time guest on the show. He lives right outside the Toronto area, and in the beginning we talk about all things bass fishing. Then things get even more interesting. So before every guest comes on, I have a conversation with them privately, and I ask, are there any things that you would like me to bring up during our conversation? Any accomplishments, any talking points you'd like to discuss? And Mike was nice enough to write me back and said, yeah, he'd like to talk about some new age electronics, but more importantly, how they tie in to the future of bass fishing, or the future of all fishing, really. So I had to ask the question, probably the hardest hitting question I've ever asked on the podcast. What is the balance between tradition and progress? And that's more of a universal society question than it is for bass, but think about it. When I look back 5-6 years ago, there was no AI. Now we're looking at AI that can give you your water temp, food sources, weather patterns, tides, lunar phases, which they can all compile into an algorithm. You press a button, it'll process all that data, and now you can find your optimal fishing spot, the right fishing time, even what fishing bait you have. Do you want to look over next to you and have an AI fishing coach? Because that's coming up.
Piece of push.
And of course, we're going to bring up the subject of forward-facing sonar, right? Live scope, active target. Is it cheating? Is it taking away from what you originally wanted to do, the mystery of fishing? So I don't really care about the tournament aspect, right? Does it give an angler an unfair advantage over someone without that technology? Yes, it absolutely does. If you've ever used one, you can see the fish swimming around in real time. Of course, that is going to give you an advantage over someone who may not be able to afford this now. But the real question is, at some point, this technology, just like televisions, are going to be affordable for everyone. So let's pretend 10 years down the road, 90% of the anglers have forward-facing sonar. They have the ability to see what the fish are doing in their environment underneath the water. Now, will that increase the catch rate? Absolutely. Will that help anglers that are inexperienced? Absolutely. Well, think about the fish, right? So if more fish are being caught, how could that affect their behavioral pattern? Are they going to be more skimmish? Are they going to change their eating habits? Because there are people that can zero in on exactly where they are in the middle of the lake and being targeted over and over and over, especially, the highly pressured lakes. How is that going to affect them? Now, I am not get off my lawn guy, so I do appreciate new technology, innovations, and improving life. But I'm just asking the question, okay, so now we have forward-facing sonar, we can see the fish in real time. Attached to me, I have an AI app that's giving me water temp, food sources, weather patterns, tides, lunar phases, and it's compressing all that data, telling me exactly where I should go on the lake, keeping track of the spots that I've been, knowing how many casts that I've made, maybe even having a drone giving me an eagle eye view of where the bait fish are, where the structures are. I can already see what the bottom of the lake looks like, whether it's a soft bottom or a hard bottom, if there's rocks, if there's trees, if there's weeds, how high the weeds are. I have all this information. Am I still fishing? Am I still walking down to the pond like I did with my dad when I was 10 years old, not even knowing what type of fish were in that body of water, throwing it out, having a conversation with him? I don't want to lose that aspect of fishing. All right, So we'll get to the interview in a second, but first, last night I was sitting down on my couch and I was on Instagram. I was looking at all my pictures and reels and I went down to the very first post. My very first post, I was wearing a hat that said Liquid Mayhem.
Recognize.
That was 7 years ago. 7 years later, I still use Liquid Mayhem. I have 8 or 9 tubes on my workbench. I have some out in my Jeep. I have them in every tackle bag. It's pretty amazing. A company that's been around this long is improving their products. I've seen a lot of companies flame out in 7 years. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm telling you, Liquid Mayhem is a game changer. If you don't use scent, you're doing yourself a disservice. Liquid Mayhem is also a great follow on X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. Check them out or go to liquidmayhem.com.
No, seriously, come on, do it. Do it.
All right, that's about all I have for an open. So real quick, I do appreciate all the support. Thank you for listening. And with that being said, let's hit it. All right, let's head to the hotline presented by Deeper Sonar. Head to deepersonar.com to check out the new cutting-edge Quest bait boat. So, as advertised, we're going to bring on our first two-time guest of the show, a great follow on Instagram and TikTok. His name is Mike Bodnar, also known as Kayak Dude 77. Mike, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really good, Nick. Nice talking to you again. Always a pleasure, and like I mentioned before, love talking about fishing.
Absolutely, Mike. And again, thank you for taking the time to sit down, have another conversation with me about fishing. I always appreciate it. So, in the beginning, I always like to ask the guests, kind of give us a little background, let us know where you're from, what you grew up fishing for, maybe what you're doing now, and I'll leave it open-ended for you.
Okay. Well, my name is Mike Bodnar. I live in Ontario, Canada, specifically the Kawartha Lakes region. We have no shortage of fishing opportunities here. I retired last summer, so this swimming season, it's full-on fishing as often as I can. I'm lucky enough to live across the street from an awesome bass and muskie lake, so I can get out virtually every day, and most of the summer, that's exactly what I do. Favorite target species is largemouth bass. I like smallmouth bass fishing, walleye. Don't target muskie, but I do get into them once in a while in a few of the areas that I fish for bass. Basically, I kayak fish. I used to tournament fish and kind of gotten away from that. I like to fish different lakes, not necessarily ones that are that you're using for tournaments. I have a lot of buddies that we fish together. Some of them tournament fish, some don't. Yeah, so I just strictly catch and release. Like I said, always up for adventures. I fish probably 100, 120 times a summer. Our season here is somewhat short. Bass doesn't open up here in Ontario in my zone until the third week of June, and it goes right until I believe it's the third week of November. So it's a little bit compressed, but by the time the season opens, I'm chomping at the bit and just get out there as much as I can.
So you're pretty good. You already answered my first question, which was going to be how many times a year do you go fishing? The second one is going to be a little different for you. I like to ask, is it more of a seasonal thing? But you actually have fishing seasons up there. Can you walk us through that, and how do you feel about it?
I firmly believe in seasonal fishing just because it gives the fish, time to recover, to do their thing, and because we're so close in proximity to Toronto, for instance, the pressure on the lakes up here is tremendous. So my own personal take is I'm a catch and release fisherman. I do occasionally keep a fish or two for a meal, but mostly it's a catch and release. I'm not sure if you're familiar with kayak tournaments, but they're pretty much all catch and release.
Mm-hmm.
So our seasons kind of break down like this. We have a open season for panfish, and in there we throw in perch, crappie, bluegills, things like that. You can fish for them all year round, including the winter.
Okay.
Trout opens up in, I think it's second or third week of April. Shortly after that, our walleye season opens up. And then right after that, our muskie season. And about a month after that, our bass season opens, and that's for both bass, smallmouth and largemouth bass.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, my own personal take on it is, first of all, let me say I'm jealous to areas like in the States that don't have a closed season for them. I see guys fishing, spawning fish. And on certain lakes, I can see that. But, the further you go, the growing season's shorter. So I firmly believe that it does impact, your quality of fish, whether it's size and or age. I mean, it takes a long time for a bass in the northern areas to get to double digits. I mean, if you can find them, they're few and far between, but they're here. It's just a matter of being on the right body of water. Being in the right place at the right time is a big part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you go by the handle Kayak Dude 77. Can you walk us through what your kayak looks like? The setups, what you bring on board. If I would happen to meet up with you at the boat ramp and glance over, what would I be looking at?
Absolutely. All right. So as I mentioned before, I target bass, whether it's largemouth or smallmouth. The lakes we have here in our area, my lake has both bass, smallmouth and largemouth. On the south end of our lake, which is where I live, it's predominantly largemouth.
Okay.
So if I want to go for a smallmouth, I have to go to the north end of the lake. But I prefer actually to target smallmouth on other lakes for a variety of reasons. Number one, water type. So let me explain that a little bit. The majority of the Kawartha lakes in my area here are basically flooded river valleys, so to speak. So very weedy, very grassy, lots of wild rice, fantastic environment for largemouth bass and other species. But as you know, smallmouth bass prefer a deeper, cooler, rockier, gravel type bottom. So if I, let's say, go half an hour north of where I am, you get into the Canadian Shield, which is predominantly rock, and then you get what I call a different type of water. So you get the rocky, clear depths. And with my kayak powered by a trolling motor, it's fantastic. I literally don't have to touch my paddle for the entire day. Basically, a day on the water chasing largemouth, and I'll break that down because the strategy and the equipment's just slightly different.
Okay.
On my lake, for instance, I don't even take my fish finder if I'm fishing my home lake. I've lived here for 20 years. Being a kayak fisherman, you tend to be a little bit more thorough in the way you fish than you do in a boat. Once you fish a particular lake multiple times, you kind of get the lay of the land, so to speak. So a fish finder on my lake here, I mean, it's useful, but I don't really need it because I know my spots. So, I don't even bother taking it out of my lake. Rod wise, let me see. I'll take probably 4 rods for a session. So
all right.
I'll take, say, for instance, 2 spinning rod setups and 2 bait casters. Exclusively 30-pound Power Pro braided line, moss green.
Me too.
No variation in line. No matter what strategy I'm using, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth, I fish 30-pound. Sometimes when I'm, say, drop shotting, I'll drop down to 20-pound Power Pro, so it's a little thinner diameter, less visible, although I'm not a big believer that the fish really are bothered by that too much. When they're aggressive and they're on the bite, I don't really think it matters what kind of line you're using. They're going to hammer it. My tackle box is no larger than, say, a shoebox, and I'll take my go-to baits. The majority of the time, if not all the time, I fish only plastics. I don't know if I should give you my secret baits for my largemouth, but my favorite worms are Zoom Magnum Finesse, X-Zone Pro Series True Center Sticks, and the bubblegum, or I think it's Carnival Candy it's called. It's kind of a pink-orange color.
Really?
So good for visibility. Yeah.
Okay.
And drop shotting, it's Angler's Choice, which is a company that I work with.
Recognize.
I use they're called a spear tail worm on a Ned head. Just dynamite on bass. They just can't resist that action on those things.
Yeah.
And I'll throw, say, a 3-inch or a 4-inch sort of paddle tail grub on a jig head and just kind of burn that. And it seems to work.
Okay.
So my bait casters, I'll either throw, some kind of frog, whether it's a popping style or walk the dog kind of bait.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. I don't take very much more. I have a net, but 99% of the time when I'm fishing for largemouth, I just lip the bass. It's a single hook setup, so I'm not too concerned about getting stuck with a treble. Alternatively, if I'm fishing for smallmouth, my strategies change a little bit more. I'll throw more minnow type baits. So we're talking multiple trebles, a popper. Berkeley Pop 60 is probably my favorite popper. It's got a good size to it. It's not too large. It's not too small. It's got, the little beads inside, and you can cast it a mile, even on braided line. Your Rapala, minnow baits, depending on how deep I'm going to go. And then, of course, you got your drop shot setups and, Ned rig. And that's pretty much my strategies for both largemouth and smallmouth. Of course, I always have a net on board just in case you get that fish of a lifetime. And I also carry the net to give me an opportunity sort of to keep the fish in the water while I get, whether it's my camera or my video recorder set up to do a clip or whatnot. Take a couple quick photos or a video, whatever the case may be, and then just let them go. So yeah, it's pretty a simple setup.
Okay.
I don't need an anchor. I have a spot lock on my trolling motor. So it's GPS. I can, the night before, I can go onto my fish finder. I can mark a few waypoints on there, and my fish finder talks to my trolling motor. So when I go there in the morning, I turn them both on, connect, and away you go, and then it'll just plot me to my, my chosen route, so to speak. The next day once I'm on the water. So it's not super high technology. A lot of it, as I mentioned before, I rely on experience and some knowledge and just sheer dumb luck.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned filming very early in the podcast. Was that something that you did in the very beginning, or over time, did you just start doing it more and more? And then also, what kind of challenges do you face while trying to fish and film at the same time?
Well, there's a couple of them. Originally, I just took a photo, whether it was usually with my phone. I was never big an action camera person. There's a lot of fiddling around with it, and I got big hands, so trying to hit little buttons on them is just, a real pain. So the majority of my filming, whether it was photos or video, I did on my phone. Over the years, I've kind of added some other. This year, I added the Insta360 X3, which is a 360 video and camera capabilities. So I'm looking forward to working with that. I've been kind of messing around with it over the winter, just trying to hit my stride with it, because again, it's all a learning curve, right? Like anything else. Other than that, I don't really use anything else. It's my phone, and yeah, I do all my editing, on a couple of apps that I use, and
nice.
Pick my favorite shots. Always trying to get, my good side.
Yeah.
Not too many. And that's kind of what I do, and I really enjoy that part of it. Always kind of had an eye for photography pretty much my entire life. I like taking not just photos of my fish, but a lot of the locations that I do. I'm sure you've run into it too, where you've been, whether fishing on the lake or fishing on the shore, and you look over and you see some deer or what have you wander down in the water, and whether it's loons or ospreys or what have you, there's always something to see. And I've been fortunate enough that being able to see some amazing things on the water that you would never see, A, if you're still at home sleeping, and B, if you're sitting at home watching TV, which for me, I'm just chomping at the bit in the summertime to get out. And I think I mentioned before, I'm an early bird, so I try and If I'm going on a road trip, I try and be on the body of water that I'm fishing by 5 or 5:30. So sometimes I'll do two trips in a day. I'll do a road trip to another lake and come home for lunchtime. We have a private park with boat launch and a beach and whatnot, and I'll go out on my home lake and fish there. So,
All right, very nice. So let's get one more fishing question in, and then we'll transition to something else. So you mentioned you have a lot of lakes. You have an abundance of lakes up there. How often do you fish new lakes? And what's your approach? What research do you do when fishing a lake for the first time?
okay, so much like everybody else, with the internet, I utilize a lot of the information that's available there. You type in the name of the lake, and chances are somebody's been fishing on it. And there's a variety of different apps. You can leave comments, you can leave coordinates, you can leave information on what type of fish, if there's any launches available, access. One of the upsides of being a kayak fisherman is being able to pretty much launch anywhere.
Yeah.
Mind you, my kayak is not a car topper. I tow it around with a trailer. I don't have to have a boat launch to launch, although it's a lot easier to do it.
Sure.
If I have to, I'll use my kayak cart and slip it into the water and off you go. So once I hit the body of water, I kind of have a game plan already set in my mind.
Yeah.
Whether it's, locations that I've already sort of selected and inputted into my fish finder, or it's a visual, much like yourself, I rely on my experience and knowledge. You hit the points, you hit, for largemouth, you're going to hit docks and things that different structures. Smallmouth bass, I'll look for rocky points, I'll look for shoals, I'll look for fall down trees along the shoreline, things of that nature that I know that are just magnets for those type of fish, and kind of work from there. It also doesn't hurt that, if you stop, say on your way there to, say, a local store, or like I said, I don't really fish with live bait, but if you went to a tackle store, local knowledge, you can always ask the locals, and people are always willing to, give you some tips and information. Not necessarily give you their best spots, but they'll kind of point you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much my game plan when I go on the road.
Yeah. And actually, one of my favorite things about traveling, other than maybe eating at a new restaurant, is checking out new bait shops. In Northeast Ohio, we are lucky. We have some really, really awesome local bait shops. Not only just talking to the people there, getting the knowledge, just walking around, seeing what they have in stock. It's super interesting to me, and it's definitely one of my favorite parts of the trip.
You hit that one right on the head, because, a lot of local bait shops carry things that work in their area. Like you mentioned, all you have to do is look around, and it'll kind of give you an idea of what might work, what won't work. Again, like I said, the internet's an invaluable resource when it comes to sort of narrowing down baits or lures that'll be effective on that body of water. The season also is a huge factor too, right? You know yourself, different times of the year, different baits will work better than others, and you kind of key in on that. I like to take a variety of things that will work at any time of the year, because you know what? You just never know. A lure that might be better in the fall may be just dynamite that day in the summer. So
sure.
Always try and carry a little variety of different baits and different colors.
Perfect. And that's actually going to lead us up to our next talking point. So, when I reached out to you and said, hey, do you have anything you want to bring up during the podcast? One of the things you mentioned was new technology in fishing. So I was thinking about this when I was doing my research, and I'm going to ask you probably the hardest hitting question that I've ever asked on the podcast.
Okay.
What is the balance between tradition and progress?
Oh, well, you see, that's, that question is a hot topic, on social media, and even in my circle of friends, my buddies that I fish with, it's huge, because, it's kind of like in the position I was in a few years ago when I started out in kayak fishing. I was a paddler, and then it came along the pedal drives. I always kind of thought, you know what, they're nice, but it's kind of cheating. And then, A few years later, motorized kayaks come out, and now everybody's got motorized kayaks. So is it still kayak fishing if you're not paddling? I think so. And then the same kind of relates to electronics. Back in the day, it was, tie a rock on a string and mark off certain depths on the string, and then you kind of get an idea of how deep you are. And then we progressed to, the graphs, and now we're looking at panoptics and, live scope. My take on it is, if you can afford it and you are a competitive angler, I mean, I totally get it. You're not just in it because you enjoy the sport. You're in it because the companies that you work for insist on results, right? If you don't get the results, then you're missing out on something, whether it's the new technologies, things like better equipment and so forth. So my personal belief is, I think we're kind of losing the sort of purpose that we all kind of got into fishing, figuring them out and sort of trial and error, and we'll get them the next time. Whereas now, like if you watch MLF and Bass Nation and whatnot on TV, which I do all the time, I see all these top anglers, and they're all just stuck to the screen at the front of the boat. They're not taking in the whole experience anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of leaving I don't want to say a bad impression on young anglers. It's kind of defeating the whole sort of enjoyment of the sport. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's not fair. I'm just saying that taking a kid fishing and, everybody's staring at a little screen to see, the essentially almost like a video game, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then targeting that. Is that really is there enjoyment in that? I don't know.
Yeah. And when I was researching this, and you did make me do research, by the way, I was looking at the live scope. So I did use a live scope in a tournament. And if you're asking me, did we have an unfair advantage? Absolutely. So what we did was, I was the person in charge of dropping the unit into the water, and then my partner would look at the screen. So this particular time, we were targeting very, very large bridges with, maybe 100, 200 different sets of columns, supports holding up the bridge. So I drop it in, we pan around, we went to 1, 2, 3, now up to 8, 10, 15 columns. But for whatever reason, the 16th column was just loaded with activity. And then once we found the fish, we were able to see them in real time with our baits going down. We knew exactly how deep they are. Were they interested in that color? Were they swimming away from the bait? Were they coming to the bait? So we'll talk about the tournament aspect in a second, but that's not what I'm really concerned about. In the future, once the majority of the population has this technology, how is it going to affect the fish? Like the conservation, are places going to get fished out quicker? Is it going to change the fish's behavior? Once we're able to study exactly, the average weekend fisherman, exactly how they're moving and how we can manipulate them into biting our bait.
Well, it depends on the body of water, right? I mean, here where I am in Ontario, and I'm simplifying here. There's a lot of sort of nuances that would play into that. The further north you go, the less pressure, obviously, you're going to have. So, time, travel, distance, all of that is a huge factor. Does it impact the fish? I certainly believe so. Will it impact them in the sense that they become more wary? I don't know. Then you fall into the sort of the survival rate of catch and release, if that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
I've always been a catch and release type of fisherman. Again, like I mentioned, occasionally, I'll keep 1 or 2 for dinner or what have you.
Yeah.
But, when you're talking tournaments and here on our bodies of water here, there's basically a tournament every weekend on the lakes here. So you're talking a lot of pressure. And then when you throw in the people that come up from the city, the cottagers, and then the locals, that's a lot of pressure on bodies of water. Now, can they sustain them? I don't know. Our ministry of M&R, it's called Ministry of Natural Resources here in Ontario. They don't stock as much as they used to. So when you take all those factors into consideration, yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, it's gonna affect them. Maybe not so in the sense that it's going to totally wipe them out, but when you take all those factors, the pressure, the number of people fishing, you're going to have to start going further north to more remote locations to find active and just strong populations. So I think in the bigger picture, yeah, it does come into effect for sure.
And being able to see them in real time, how they're
Yep.
behaving underneath the water. All right, this is the first time really average people have this viewpoint. Average people that can afford
Well,
the.
I don't know how many average people can afford like a $6,000, fish finder and a $5,000 transducer to go with that. I certainly can't.
True today, though today, but
Yeah.
5 years from now, that
Oh,
you know
100%.
that cost will go down.
Who knows what the technology will be? Like Deeper Sonar there came out with the little remote control boat.
Recognize.
They may have a remote control submarine that you can sort of send out and seek and whatnot. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to that type of technology, right?
Yeah,
So
and what I was reading was, people are nervous that not only more bass are going to be caught, but people are going to be able to observe their feeding habits and adjust, and then the
for sure.
bass are going to be even less likely to hit, and they're going to change their behavior, and then we start a
think so.
snowball effect, and not just bass either. Every species of fish that people go after, it almost, I don't know, you don't want to change their environment too much, I guess.
No, absolutely not. And again, like I mentioned, for the regular angler to be able to afford that, I don't know if that's as big a factor as maybe like on the tournament trails. I know a few of my buddies that have kayaks that have gone and then put, the live scope on a kayak. Is it necessary? I mean, I don't really think so because, you know, the majority of the time, and I'm going to speak for myself, I fish in bodies of water in depths of 30 feet or less. So a traditional, side scan, down scan, chirp type of fish finder, I believe is more than adequate. When you combine that with the knowledge of maps and structure and, your knowledge, I mean, you
Mhm.
should be able to do pretty good, right? I mean,
Sure.
you're not taking out the guessing or the challenge of, planning your strategy and having it work. I find that very satisfying. I'm sure you're the same way. If you go to a body of water that you're not totally familiar with, you've
Yeah.
pre-planned the night before, what am I going to use? How am I going to fish this and whatnot? And when it plays out on the body of water, I get a lot of satisfaction out of that because I figured them out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
So
that's the mystery and the intrigue, and that's why I think a lot of people are going.
that's part of the whole thing that I fell in love with is that whole
Yes,
part, right?
but it gets worse. All right. Now,
Mhm.
not only do we have live scope and active target, now we have AI. So what AI
Yes.
is going to do, it's going to save the water temperature, the food sources, the weather patterns, the tide,
Yeah.
the lunar phases,
Yeah.
and it's going to create an algorithm. And it's going to
Oh,
process
100%.
all that data, and it's only going to get more intelligent and stronger, and it's going to lead you to optimal fishing time, fishing
Yep.
areas. So not only can you see the fish, you're going to have this abundance of information about where they are.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And then, like I touched on before, where's that line that it sort of, you leave the enjoyment and the pursuit, the thrill of the hunt, so to speak, and then the sort of, I don't want to say the monotony of it being too easy. Your thought process has been taken away and replaced by technology. Is it as satisfactory? I don't know. I don't know if that would be for me.
uh,
Again, every angler is different, right?
yeah, and while I was digging around, I saw that there's a company right now that's actually developing an app for a fish coach. So not only will it keep track of like how many casts that you take and how many days you go fishing, like if you're stumped on the water and like you would ask a friend, you can ask this app and it will give you advice in real time.
Oh, that's some information that I would love to know. I mean, You know yourself, you're an angler. How many times did I cast that day? I have no idea. I'm sure it's in the hundreds, if not thousands, depending on
Yeah.
how long I've been out. Right? I mean, those kind of stats may be interesting. You know, after the fact. I don't know how much information I'd be able to uptake when I'm on the water because I don't know about you, but once I get out on the water, like I'm so zoned in on my whole surroundings.
Oh yeah.
You know, sound on the water. I do a lot of sight fishing when I'm out on the water too. I look for activity on the water, whether it's birds feeding or
Oh yeah.
movement in the shallows, the weeds moving. All those factors kind of play into my strategy because I'm sure you've experienced this where you've got a game plan. You show up on the lake. You've tried what you've sort of pre-planned as far as your game plan is going to be, and it's not working, and you have to change on the fly. So then you go into sort of a different mode where maybe sight fishing is taken over, and then you concentrate on that. I mean, I've had that happen to me where I thought the day was going to go one way and it's not going, and then I start seeing movement on the water. I start casting to the movement, and I'm starting to catch fish, and it's sort of switch my game plan once I'm on the water. That is another huge sort of rush for an angler, being able to sort of adapt on the go. How much you're going to be able to do with your technologies. I don't think they can take those kind of factors into consideration, at least not that I'm aware of anyways.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
It's almost like trying to draft baseball players. There's the analytical part where you look at all the stats.
Yes, exactly.
And then there's the scout sitting in the stands looking at all the stuff that you can't measure. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. No doubt.
So this goes along the lines, and I've never asked these questions, but I find them super interesting. So I'm going to ask them to you for the first time.
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with Kevin Van Dam?
Yes.
Okay. Take in consideration everything that we've talked about so far, your home lake, new age electronics, all that information. You put Kevin Van Dam on a kayak, you on a kayak in your home lake. Could you beat him heads up one day tournament?
Wow, that's a good question. I've often thought that because I've had guys I've run into them on the water and they're fishing in their boats and they're watching me, catching one after the other. Me against Kevin Van Dam, it's a different ballgame. To be honest with you, when I fish with some of my friends that have boats, I don't enjoy the boat fishing as much as I do the kayak fishing. I think I mentioned it earlier. I feel personally I'm a much more thorough and more intuitive fisherman when I'm in my kayak rather than in a boat.
And I wanted to mention that because the experience that you have on that particular body of water against somebody who is, one of the greatest ever, being there for the first time, I would think, Mike, that you'd have the advantage there. Like if I was a betting man, I'd put money on you.
I would do okay. Yeah, I think I would do okay. I'm not. Again, it's I mentioned before, part of fishing is luck, right? And when you combine that with your knowledge, I mean, let's face it, Van Dam's no dummy when it comes to catching bass. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But it's a different ballgame. If you were to take him out of a boat, put him in a kayak, he might struggle with that. I mean, you look at Mike Iaconelli, right? He's done that transition from boat to kayak and back and forth, and been fairly successful, in both. Can you do it repeatedly on a lake that you're not familiar with? I really don't know. I really couldn't answer that, conclusively that you'd be able to outfish somebody because, again, I can go out in say, for instance, on my lake and fish it on a Monday and just absolutely have a fantastic day on the water.
Yeah.
And then you go on Tuesday, almost identical sort of conditions, and you're struggling for a bite. So it would be certainly an interesting thing. I can tell you that for a fact. Now, would the prize money be the same if we were fishing that? Like, am I looking at 100,000 or?
I wish.
Me too.
All right. I got two more theoretical questions here. All right.
Sure.
So you put Kevin Van Dam on a new body of water on the shore, walking around like a normal average fisherman, do you think he would do better than the average fisherman? The same? I'm not going to say worse. He would probably not do worse. But do you think he would be catch about as many fish as a normal average weekend angler, or do you think his skills would transcend fishing from the shore like everyone else?
Well, when I first started fishing, I did a lot of shore fishing. I had friends that I used to go with, and I had some friends that just they had the touch, the feel for it more
Hmm.
so than I did. It's the same thing when you go you put a kayak fisherman in a boat. The feel is not the same. It's just your sensitivity, I believe, is diminished somewhat in a boat. And I don't know, excuse me, I don't know if it's just sort of the closer contact in a kayak. If you've slowed down more and you're more sort of in touch with what's going on around you.
Yeah.
I think so. So I think Kevin Van Dam against a regular shore fisherman, I mean, somebody that fishes regularly, I think it'd be close, you know, definitely.
I kind of agree with you. I think it would be
Yeah,
closer than most people think.
I think
Um,
so.
on that playing field. All right, last one with Kevin Van Dam.
Sure.
You give Kevin Van Dam his boat, all of his electronics on maybe a lake that he's fished a couple of times, so he's been there before.
Okay.
But he has bottom of the barrel Walmart tackle. How do you think his success would be?
Oh, I think he still make out okay.
You think so?
Absolutely. I think
I kind
again
I kind of
touching
agree
on
too.
yeah, I think you're probably looking at his experience, his knowledge. Better tackle doesn't necessarily make a better fisherman,
And I'm
right?
just using Kevin Van Dam you can use any professional fisherman in
Oh,
this.
100%. I understand exactly your thought process on it. I think it's not always the equipment; it's how you use it and your knowledge and confidence too, right? I mean, yourself. You have a setup that you're confident with when you're targeting certain species of fish. Are used to using it,
Yeah.
whereas maybe Kevin Van Dam may not have that same experience with it. I mean, yourself, the equipment that they use and the equipment that you and I might use, probably not at the same level as far as quality and sensitivity. I wouldn't say that so much as the specialty sort of rods. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the super, super high quality carbon fiber or graphite or what have you material. Um, some of them, designed by themselves, right? Companies ask for their input when they're, designing these different pieces of equipment, and what you like in a rod. I know what I like in a rod, so it may not be the same thing. And if I take your rod and you take mine, would we sort of end up with the same results? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
I really don't.
So, do you use the same brand of rod on all your different setups?
I have a variety of rods. My favorite spinning rods are Berkeley. They're called Series One. It's kind of a medium light, medium heavy combination. Slow tip. I need a little bit of backbone because the majority of the time, especially when I'm fishing for largemouth, I'm fishing in really thick cover. So
Yeah.
as soon as I feel that bite, I mean, I'm getting that guy out of there. It's the same thing with bait casters. When I'm throwing a frog, I like one with a little bit more whip to it, so I can just get a little bit more distance. Pitching a jig, say for instance, I want something with a little bit more stout. So once I feel that thump, it's just yank her out of there.
So, what's your favorite topwater frog?
I'm gonna probably have to say it's Booyah Pad Crusher or the Junior. It's a little bit smaller. Um,
Okay.
I tend to size down a little bit more just because it's not so much the fish. I mean, they'll hit a larger frog. It's just me just being so anticipating the bite and not just being able to delay for a second. I just tend to, once I get that hit, I'm cranking on it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, I miss a fish because I'm just a little bit too hyped up. I don't take my time and let it really take it. Sometimes I just snatch it right out of them.
A lot of times the first hit is not actually to eat the bait, it's just to stun it.
Yep,
And a lot of
absolutely.
times,
Yep.
yeah. you have to wait a couple seconds for them to take it down.
Yeah,
I know you're in a different area. Do you guys have the very original Lunker Hunk frog?
I am. Yes.
I haven't used much of their other products. They've came out with a whole line of baits since the original one that won that ICAST
Yep.
award. But for me, that's my favorite one for two reasons. One, the casting distance on that is the best that I've found.
Yep.
It really goes through the wind. The second thing is the hookup ratio on that frog. There's been a lot of frogs that I have in my bag that I get a lot of hits on, but it doesn't matter if you can't make the hook set.
Absolutely,
So
I
the
agree.
hookup ratio on the Lunker Hook frog for me is probably one of the best.
I agree. It's the same, like the poppers that I use. I like the Berkeley Pop 60. I mentioned before, the size is kind of a medium, so it's not too small, it's not too big. It's just the perfect size. And for me, I find between the nice little gurgle, blurp, burper, call it what you will, the little, spit, the style, sort of the shape, if you look at a lot of the hard popper baits, they have a slight curve to the body. The Berkeley one is a little bit straighter, and I feel that the way the hooks hang down from them, you get a better hook ratio on them.
And one more thing about the Lunker Hunk frog, it has the actual legs. Now, in the beginning,
Yes.
I remember catching 4 or 5 fish and the legs were tore off. They fixed that, so I can actually use the
Yep.
same frog for almost, I wouldn't say
Yep.
the whole season, but pretty close.
Yeah, I find that was happening quite a bit with the live target. I don't know if you ever fished the little mouse, and they had
Okay.
a silicone tail on the end. They were the first few sort of incarnations of that were terrible. On my lake here, the largemouth would just tear that tail off, and that having that little tail hanging down in the water a little bit to me was sort of that last little trigger that they needed. And
Yeah.
after a couple of bass, they just tear that thing right off. I remember returning a couple to the store and just like saying, like, this is absolutely terrible quality. Having said that, I changed my baits as well, so God only knows there'll be another one the next time I go to the store. I'm sure I'll be sure that'll be the one to go to.
Yeah.
Probably like you, always looking for something new, right?
Sure. Yeah. And that was about 5 years ago. There's a company called Liquid Mayhem. And some people may think it's a gimmick, and some people swear by it. I'm one of the people that I think scent matters on some baits.
Yep.
Reaction strike baits, as far as like fast moving crank baits and jerk baits, I don't use scent because to me that's a reaction strike. It's instinct.
Yeah.
They're hitting that thing. Finesse baits, even if they do have their own scent, a lot of times I will add my own scent. It doesn't need to be that particular brand. But on frogs, I have fished the same color frog in the same location for a half hour, and I will put scent on the bottom of that frog and cast it out. And there's been many times that I've gotten hits in the same places. And I think what's happening is I think the bass are up there looking at it, and they're a little hesitant. But if you add that scent, it's just enough to get that hit. Do you use scent much when you fish?
I don't use it a lot. I do use it occasionally. Say, for instance, if I'm using a rig and I'm using a small, say, a speartail worm or the X-Zone Ned Hog, I think it's called. So it's a short little stubby.
Okay.
So I'll give it a little bit, whether it's spray of the Gulp liquid spray, or I'll use Liquid Mayhem and just give it a little dip. Those type of baits tend to be a little bit slower moving. So I think it gives them, whether it's a bass or a walleye, depending on what you're targeting, it gives them a little bit of sort of just a little sniff of something different as opposed to just, the visual, right?
Sure. Yeah. Also, every time I go to a store to buy a new product, like a new bait, I always pick up two. I pick up a dark color and a light color, and I switch colors all the time. How often do you switch baits? Because I feel like I switch baits more than almost anybody.
Well, when I'm throwing, say for instance, a wacky worm, that's one of my favorite setups when I'm going for largemouth. I have 5 different colors of worms that I'll take out. The same worm. I like this particular worm because it's the size and the salt, so I get a better sinking action on it. Now, occasionally I'll throw, say, a blue, black, that'll work, say, early in the morning.
Okay.
And then it'll kind of back off a bit, and then I'll start throwing one that's sort of a green pumpkin with red flakes in it when the sun's up a little bit higher and they're sort of tucked in more closer to, say, weed cover or stumps. And I don't know if it's sort of that predator sort of trigger that gets them with the red color or what, but just find that, later in the day, midday, the red flake, red colored baits work a little bit different. And on sort of cloudy water, I think I mentioned it earlier with the X-Zone, the true center stick. It's the bubble gum or that carnival candy. So like a fluorescent orange or a fluorescent sort of pink combination. So it's a visual more so than anything else. You see it from a further distance. It's something a little bit different. I remember when I first moved up in this area 20 some odd years ago, and a couple of my neighbors that were a little bit into fishing and whatnot, I'd go out with them, and their go-to color, and it's the basic sort of statement was in this whole area, you got to fish something white. Now it was a white power grub or a white worm, or they worked out okay, but I thought other colors got to work. So over the years, I wouldn't say developed a pattern, but I kind of just went to these 5 different colors, and it just seems that sometimes when one's not working, and I mean the fish will tell you, right? If you're not getting bites, then what's the strategy is you switch colors. Go for the color switch. You switch the bait. You try something different. So I'll tend to fish at least 2 or 3 colors in an outing.
Okay.
So definitely think it's a factor. Yeah, for sure.
So we've talked a lot about baits, but I haven't had you mention the fluke. Do you ever fish a fluke?
I do, and I like the Zoom one.
Me
again,
too.
It is a bait that I will throw in certain areas, and I'll use my lake as an example. There's a lot of pad fields, and we're talking acres of pads, acres of them, as far as you can see. And then you get areas where you have a lot of grass. And then we get into the areas where there's a lot of wild rice. And throwing a fluke, which kind of requires some clearing to be able to sort of give it that sort of darting, sort of frantic movement. You need some open spots in the water. And having said that, in some of the pad areas, you do get into some clearing where you might have, say, a 10-foot area where it's a little clear, and I will throw one of those in there. When I'm going for smallmouth, I tend to downsize. I think it's like a 3-inch zoom fluke. I'll throw that, and I'll throw that with a bullet weight, maybe a foot or so up the line. So the actual bait itself is sort of free twitching. I don't know if that's a good description, but the weight's getting it down a little bit deeper. So it's not tucked right up against my bait, because I like to have that sort of frantic sort of movement side to side and darting action, and you don't get that when you slide that weight too tight up on that bait.
Have you ever tried the double fluke rig?
No, but it's interesting you said that, because earlier this winter, just on social media, TikTok for instance, and just scrolling through some of the I ran across a setup that caught my eye, and it was the double fluke with like a 4-foot sort of leader between the two of them. And I thought, you know what? I think that would be absolutely killer setup, because now you've got 2 flukes darting around.
Yeah. If you ever, I think you should try that.
I'm going to do that, and if I do use it and I catch something, I will post a video and tag you in it.
That'll be awesome. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yep. First time I've ever used that, I was fishing a stump field. It was about 6 feet deep for bass.
Right.
A regular, I had a St. Croix 7-foot medium action rod with a 30-pound braid, and I hook into something, and it starts going. And I'm thinking, I had the biggest bass I ever caught in my life. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I think, oh crap, I snagged one of these big carp. Turns out an hour later, it was a 35-pound flathead catfish. Wow. With the fluke right in his mouth. He must have been sitting underneath a stump, and that thing just fluttered down. And that was the first fish I ever caught on the double fluke. It was amazing.
That would have been one heck of a catch.
Yeah,
That's a nice fish. That's a nice fish.
Yeah, it's up there for probably one of the biggest ones I've ever caught. Do you remember the biggest fish you ever caught?
My buddies and I went fishing for trout and salmon. Oh, I probably had been out 3, 4 times. Not much success. And back then, I was fortunate enough at the time when I was married. My wife and I lived very close to a very popular salmon river. And I went down one morning before work, not with any expectations. And I think I had a MEPS spinner on. Okay. I was just kind of burning it through the rapids, and I tied into like a 30-pound salmon.
Wow.
And at first I didn't realize how big this thing was because, you know, yourself, sometimes when you hook into a fish, you don't really get to experience what you have on the other end of the line until the fish realizes he's hooked up. So I'm reeling it in, and, you know, it's coming along. I'm thinking, oh, it's okay. It's nothing spectacular. And then all of a sudden it decided that it didn't like what was playing out, and decided to go the other way. And, you know, the next thing you know, I'm running down the bank after this because I don't want this thing to spool me. And, you know, as soon as I saw the size of the fish, I thought, oh my God, like, how am I going to get this thing in? First of all, do I want to get this in? Because it's massive.
Yeah.
Second is, how am I going to get this in? Because I didn't have a net, because I didn't expect to catch something like that big.
Sure.
I did manage to sort of drag it up onto the shore and get the hook out. And I looked at it and I'm thinking, my God, I didn't even realize there was fish this big in the river here. So yeah, that was probably my biggest fish.
Awesome. And you probably had to deal with current too if you were in a river.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you don't realize, I don't fish for salmon and trout as much as I used to way back in the day, that when you combine all those factors, and if it's a fresh fish in the river, and they still have a lot of fight in them, boy, I'll tell you, they can really, really go. They just can take off like bullets. It's very exhilarating. But at the same time, you know, you're kind of worried because, you know, you're taking all the factors, snags, breaking off, whatnot. So my hookup ratio was much better than my landing ratio. Let's put it that way.
That is really awesome. We're kind of getting up against it here. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing is that if it's something you enjoy, for instance, fishing, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to sort of please others. Do what you enjoy. It's not always about, you know, catching the biggest fish, although, you know, me, like you and every other angler, of course, we always want to catch, you know, the biggest fish that we can and whatnot. But a lot of it for me is the enjoyment of the whole experience, whether it's, you know, pre-plan the trip up, you know, arriving on the lake. Nothing better than being the only one on the water. I absolutely cannot tell you how much I really enjoy that, and being able to enjoy that and then share it. So yeah, just do what you enjoy, and don't ever forget why you got into it. I think we spoke, you know, before, the last time we talked. If it's something you enjoy, never forget that part. Never forget why you got into it. There's always a reason. It's not always to sort of gain followers or likes or what have you. It's to be able to express yourself, whether it's, you know, outdoors, hunting, fishing, what have you. It's just, you know, do it.
No, seriously, come on, do it. Do it.
Awesome. And you know what? One of my employees today remembered something that I told him months ago, and he brought it up. Right. And he said, remember, Nick, when you said comparison is the thief of joy? And I thought about that. And you can really get sucked into, like, if you're trying to build your account on Instagram and you see all these accounts and you see all these great photos, and every day people are catching fish, and you're at work and you have to do this on this weekend, or it's raining the day you get to go fish, and you feel like you're falling behind. It doesn't matter. You know, no, in the long run, if you go out and fish when you have time to fish, and you enjoy it and appreciate it, and like you said, not just the fishing, you know, the location, the experience, the birds, the sunset, something you might find, a tackle shop, maybe even going with a friend.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nick, 100%. For years when I used to go fishing with buddies and whatnot, I wasn't always successful catching fish. My take on it was if somebody in the group, say you went with four buddies, if somebody in your group of four had a great day, I enjoyed that almost as much as they did.
Oh, yeah.
Because ultimately we do these activities because A, we love them, and B, we like to share them. So being able to share it with your wife, your partner, or your friend, what have you, is huge for me too. I mean, I can remember many trips where I was skunked, but somebody in our group managed to catch a decent fish, and that was okay with me.
Yeah, so Mike, I can't tell you how much fun I had having a conversation with you again about fishing. I truly appreciate it. Not just sharing your insights with me, but everybody that's listening. And I hope they all give you a follow on TikTok and Instagram at Kayak Dude 77. Mike, thank you for taking the time, my friend.